Welcome to the Bright Ideas Podcast.
So let's assume then, for the purposes of this conversation, that we figured out that our tribe is looking at email on their desktop and they don't really pay attention to their phone. They're not on Twitter. They're not really on social much. And so just hypothetically speaking, desktop email turns out to be the best channel for them. Now, obviously, that's not going to be applicable across the board, but we'll just go down that road for a minute. If that was the conclusion, how then would you design your outreach campaign?
You could do longer subject lines on emails, like questions, instead of just like 1 word or 2 word that I would do on mobile, because they wouldn't see the full question anyway on mobile. They'll see it on desktop. On desktop, you can get creative with things that you can send. So you can send like PDFs and white papers and stuff like that. But like, I'm a big fan of throwing images into emails, especially if somebody reads a lot of emails on desktop and you've got a product that's helping them directly with, increasing sales, for example. So you can almost like set up a side by side of a customer's dashboard before and after your use, put it in like one picture and put that in the email. And try that as the first email and just say like, hey, would you take a call if I could do this for your business? This is what we've done for other customers.
Say, let's assume now that they were a mobile email user and not a desktop user. What would you do different?
Shorter subject lines, more conversational, ask them a question about their business. Just try and get a response. Like your goal is to start a conversation in that case, because you're probably not going to be able to get as much across with the way that with how they interact. And in sales, you really need to remember, whether it's a transactional sale or like an enterprise super long cycle sale, the goal is to get to the next step. Like if you're a salesperson and you're thinking about you're trying to get somebody on the phone to close a deal, you're thinking the wrong way. Like you should be trying to get somebody on the phone to have a conversation. And that conversation point is to get a meeting. And the point of that meeting is to get the next meeting. And the point of that meeting is to get like the NDA signed. And the point of that is to get this. Is like, you need to think about it in steps. And if you do that, you'll be way more successful because you'll be thinking about the next step and not like, oh, I got to close this deal. And if you're in that first meeting and you're like, I got to close this deal, you're going to oversell, you're going to say too much, you're not going to do the right things. If you realize that like you're not going to close this deal in that meeting and you need other stakeholders to be involved in order to in order to eventually close this deal, and the next step is to get those stakeholders involved, then you instead of overselling, you'll actually ask the right questions. Well, so who needs to be involved? And, is there, can we get a meeting set up with those folks and X, Y, and Z? You're building the blocks to get to the deal long term. So when you're selling in this situation, even that first email or whatever it is, first phone call, is just to get a more informed meeting or a more informed phone call. And if you're in much more transactional sales, then a lot of times these touch bases are just little bits of marketing. It's like a law of effective frequency or law of 7. Or rule 7, I think it's called, which is it takes 7 times for somebody to see your brand before they recognize it. And whether that your brand is your company name or your name individually, it still could be a successful strategy to make sure you're staying on top of these folks and, being seen.
So in the SaaS space, there's product-led growth and sales-led growth. There's varying opinions on which is the more effective. Based upon our studies, we are attempting to go with the product-led growth strategy because the costs are lower. In theory, won't have to employ as many salespeople. Our product is you can get a 30-day trial, and then it's just a relatively affordable subscription per month. So if we're trying to use outbound to test our ability to get people to sign up without maybe ever even talking to us, how would that impact the messaging approach that you would take? And when I say talking to us, I mean talking like in person, like an actual sales call.
So it probably would change, just beginning with the end in mind. So, you don't need as many meetings. It's more transactional sales, getting somebody into the product. It changes your CTA. So instead of like speak to a rep, try us out. Other than that, it wouldn't change things too much. You'll still want to highlight other customers who've been very successful. You'll want to highlight things with like no risk, because you're not spending time or money to get into it. Just still customer development and talking to your current customers and seeing with them like what stood out to you about trying our product, and how do we magnify that when we speak to prospects. Put that in your messaging and see how that works. I think the whole decision of going product-led growth or sales rep is, to me, less about the sales process and more about adoption and customer success and onboarding. You can do product-led growth if people can get into your product by themselves and be successful. If they get into your product by themselves and then they never go back, or they churn, they don't adopt, or they don't know how to use it, or whatever, then you need onboarding, you need sales reps, you need qualification, because either the right people aren't using the product and they're just getting in there and now like they're wasting your time and wasting your support, wasting your bandwidth, whatever it is. Or the right people are, but the product's too hard for them to really understand how to get value out of, and therefore they need some kind of hand holding. And whether or not you have product-led growth or salespeople, you're always going to have like support or CSMs that end up being your salespeople for some sort of an expansion, because they come in, help the person that went in and onboarded themselves, and then help them either expand from there or get better use of the product.
So, setting aside what we've already talked about, are there other significant mistakes that you see people making when it comes to their B2B sales efforts?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing I think is the whole silver bullets thing. The second biggest thing is tying to false attribution. So for the longest time, we've had reply rates as like a big metric that shows if the things that you're doing are right. Now finally we're able to tie that to meetings booked, and we can throw reply rates out the window. And so being able to tie attribution to the right metric is so important, because reply rate was always, for me, the closest way we could get to seeing if something was directionally accurate or not. Like, okay, these people replied to my email. Like, I know that their email works, and I know that like my email resonated in some way, shape, or form. But reply rate is not a great indicator of success, because those replies could be objections or negative replies. And being able to tie to the meetings. Yeah, exactly. So being able to tie to the fact that a meeting was booked from that email or sequence or phone call or whatever is, so valuable to understanding if the things that you're doing are working. And so when we say there are no silver bullets, it means you got to test everything that you're doing. You got to iterate on your process. And even once you find something that works, you have to understand that like at some point it's not going to work anymore. Other people are going to copy it. It's going to get saturated. People are used to hearing it. And then, you have to find the new thing that works. So you should always be A/B testing towards that end goal of, that metric, that whatever that metric is for you, whether it's a meeting booked or it's a conversion, which it might be in your case. That's the new number one for me.